Okay, so this one, quote unquote, dropped yesterday. So we haven't had a huge amount of time to look at it, but some might say that we don't really need a huge amount of time to look at it. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which is an absolutely beautiful game, has now been, I was going to say upgraded, but I'm not sure it's the right word. A patch has come out for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora on the PlayStation 5 Professional. Um, what it does is to bump up settings to the quality mode level, and it runs at 60 frames per second. It was 30 and 40 on the base unit. And it uses a dynamic resolution range between 720p and 1800p, I understand. And it uses PSSR for upscaling up to 4K. Now, I loaded up the patch yesterday, and the first thing I noticed was basically this. So you're sort of panning around on, this is literally entering a save point that I had. You sort of pan around, and there were issues. Alex, what did you make of what I've shared with you so far? It's not good, is it?
No, it is not good. And it follows the exact same kind of pattern that we saw with a number of other games that got PS5 Pro patches, where I wonder, like, after the patch was implemented, how many eyes just looked at this subjectively and said, this is worth it. And
Yeah.
and
I
you're,
mean, the sort of flickering shadows, and there's something really odd going on there. And obviously the foliage side of things, the shimmer on foliage, which does seem to be a PSSR issue at this point.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is related to the fact that the foliage there is lit via their GI. So like indirect lighting, specularity, as in reflections, don't seem to go really well with PSSR at these presumably lower internal resolutions, especially in these titles from Massive for some whatever reason. And my goodness, it's just not good looking. I think in a case like this, where, you just sit still and you can see all the shimmer, even without not rotating the camera, like you also sent me a video of it, Rich, where I think,
yeah.
I mean, FSR in this game wasn't great. And I think that was one of the things that we said wasn't so awesome, was like the performance mode image quality. I thought it looked really, really rough, actually. Low resolutions FSR, right? But here it's also artifacting in a different way than FSR. So it's like you're trading artifacts in a way, and it's not a great always upgrade that you'd expect. And I think this is an issue of options, as well as a bit of managerial oversight to say that this is like the way you should do a patch. It shouldn't look worse in some aspect, is the main thing. But the thing is, if it does happen to look worse for some reason, there should still be the choice for the user to run maybe the old modes from base PS5, which I think is now the new sentiment out there. And John showed it off really well in the GT7 video, where PSSR there wasn't like a straight win, right? So, and it had its own issues. Nope. So being able to turn it off and run different modes, maybe even legacy modes, is, I think, the way forward until PSSR gets better. And I think, I don't know who's responsible for that. It's probably the people who make the game, but it's a pretty different situation to when DLSS came out, because you can always turn off DLSS. You can always turn off FSR, right? And run native if you wish. But here the user doesn't get that choice. And I think the choice is the key problem, actually.
Yeah. I mean, first thing I did when I booted the game was to look at the options, because Avatar had a pretty comprehensive selection on the base PlayStation 5. You had your 30 FPS quality mode, you had your 40 FPS quality mode if you've got a 120 hertz display, and you've got the performance mode. And, all of those modes have got strengths and weaknesses, and you choose what you want. The Pro, I was kind of a bit confused, because there's no options to select. It's just, you're getting their pro mode, which is 60 FPS quality mode settings, but using PSSR. And I've got to say, you can that sort of the performance modes between base and pro are kind of trading blows in the same way that we've seen with other FSR versus PSSR face-offs at very low resolutions. The quality mode, though, on the base unit, I would say it's better. Because it's just running seemingly at a much higher resolution. And that's kind of surprising in a way, but it just looks clearer, and you're not getting the same levels of shimmer at rest, so to speak. So yes, there's problems with this one, and I think it's a bit disappointing that it came out and wasn't perhaps put on hold because obviously there was reaction to Star Wars Outlaws as well. Actually, didn't you share a video this morning, Alex?
I did, of it, of even more snap, crackle, and pop in that PSSR. Yeah, it is. PSSR is just not acquitting itself well at lower resolutions and titles with ray trace based lighting effects. So, which makes sense, I think, because if Sony was internally training this on their own games, not a lot of their own games used ray trace based lighting. I also think a thing that we saw that is probably not happening is when DLSS, for example, 2.0 came out, the first integrations were done with NVIDIA engineers actually sometimes being sent on site. The wealth of all the PSSR patches we're seeing coming out, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't think Bluebird necessarily had a Sony engineer come in and integrate this. Maybe I'm wrong, but there was a level of oversight there to ensure quality standards from NVIDIA. DLSS wasn't open, just for everyone to grab. It was actually an approval process for a long period of time at NVIDIA to get it in a title. So it's a very different rollout than DLSS 2. And I think that's showing off in some of the quality as well as just the model just not being ready. But yeah, I really wish they could roll this back to the way it was before. Because I imagine pre-patch, you'd be getting much higher DRS resolutions in this title on PS5 Pro, right? So maybe it'd just be even flat out better.
Yeah, we just don't really know at this point. I should have banked some footage beforehand, but this kind of came out of nowhere. Performance, let's talk about that. I did do some quick frame rate tests. We've got this lovely segment in the game that Tom isolated in the original Avatar review. And we've got lots of atmospherics going on, lots of windy effects and debris flying around. It's a really good stress test, and you would get consistent drops in performance using this particular stress test area. And so we can kind of assume that we're hitting minimum resolution here, which is 720p. The Pro is faster, but it still drops frames under 60. Generally, it is a more consistent experience. It does run faster in its performance mode, but it's not 60 frames per second locked. It's all right, though. I'm not complaining too much about that. It's pretty good. But, again, I just think they should have the various modes in there so the user can choose the experience that works best. I'm okay, actually, with singular modes, but they do need to be thoroughly tested, and the developer needs to be happy with the presentation and the performance level. And I can't imagine that they would be with this, because it just doesn't look great.
That's the thing that really gets me here, and this has kind of been the big differentiator between some of these Pro patches. Is like you look at what Polyphony did with GT7, and you can tell that they were very carefully implementing these Pro features, and they kind of determined what they felt worked and what didn't, and then give the user options, right? Like clearly to get ray tracing in the cockpit in game at 60 FPS, they couldn't use their prior rendering strategy. So they did have to implement PSSR there. But then they also clearly realized, well, we can still do RT without PSSR at 4K. We just have to disable it for this one view. I mean, to me, that's like really smart, like just engineering design where they like suss out the best and worst case scenarios and then give you the options, right? Whereas some of these Pro patches just feel like they didn't get proper full testing at all, or really much of anything, or like even subjective analysis where you just look at this and like, okay, this looks objectively actually worse. Maybe we should have options, or maybe we shouldn't do this specific thing. Maybe we should try something else. So, and it seems like a lot of that just hasn't happened. And I understand like patches like this probably don't have much budget behind them, not much manpower. They go through the trouble, they implement it, and then it's like, well, okay, right?
I think the issue is that, Yeah, I think the issue is that we were looking for a comprehensive replacement for FSR2. And unfortunately, that does require an upscaler to work well on
Yes,
lower resolutions.
it
And
does.
PSSR is having issues there. But you're quite right. I mean, we've seen so many games now that have just been deployed with pro patches that have got issues, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
you have to wonder, I mean, there does seem to be almost the perception that PSSR was almost treated like a fire and forget solution. Okay, this is machine learning based. It's going to be better. Let's just run with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you're looking at issues in Outlaws and Jedi Survivor, Avatar now as well. And it's clearly not the case. It needs to be deployed with some care. And clearly there's still work to do from Sony in terms of getting this where it needs to be. Yeah, kind of strange and disappointing because obviously Avatar is such an awesome game. And to have actual compromised experience from your $700 console, that's problematic. But, again, the question really does need to be asked. It's like, literally this clip panning around, looking at the scenery, shadows clearly bugged, not working properly. And then, just looking at some foliage here and it's a shimmering mess.
It,
I mean, this is
dude,
basic scrutiny.
I know the foliage to me looks like the worst AO implementation I've ever seen. Basically,
Right.
you know what I mean? It looks like broken AO, or it can't resolve anything. It's all shimmering and just that's not good. I don't understand how this was actually like missed or deemed like, yeah, this is fine.
And it's curious because, we've got two Sony games, Sony first party games, where the developers have decided, well, maybe the user should have the choice of whether to use PSSR or not, which is quite interesting. God of War and GT7 being the two games in question. And then obviously we've got the Horizon games where Guerrilla just seemingly developed their own solution.
I want to know more about that too, because when you look at Horizon Forbidden West, I really think it's the best image quality I've ever seen in a console game. Like just the clarity, and it's so solid, so free of like shimmering and noise, yet it's so sharp. It's really, really good. And considering how visually dense that game is, that's an impressive achievement. And but we don't know enough about what they're actually doing there. Like what is going on with that mode. Hopefully they share whatever they've learned with other teams, because boy, they're onto something good there.
Yeah. So hopefully there'll be something happening with these games. I mean, obviously we've seen a hotfix of sorts, a mitigation, as we called it last week on Silent Hill 2. And the solution was just to go back to TSR on an Unreal Engine 5 game. That's not an option for Avatar, but I still can't help but think that maybe FSR2 would have produced a better job, crazy as it sounds. But
Here we
the
are.
particular makeup of this game really isn't suiting PSSR.